Emma Carson stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribcage as the infamous crime lord Marcus Santoro leaned back in his chair, a half-smile playing across his lips. Moments earlier, he had casually asked her, a shy waitress, for financial guidance, clearly joking around. His men had chuckled softly, expecting her to mumble an apology and scurry away. Instead, Emma swallowed her fear and gave him an honest suggestion, her voice remarkably steady. Now the entire restaurant had gone deathly quiet, all eyes fixed on the stunned mob boss. Santoro swirled the amber liquid in his glass thoughtfully, then uttered a response that hit Emma like lightning. She had no idea her offhand advice would lead to this moment. The upscale Italian restaurant, Bellissimo, buzzed with the subdued murmur of New York City's elite wrapping up their Thursday evening. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over tables draped in crisp white linen and adorned with gleaming silverware. Impeccably dressed waitstaff glided between tables with practiced grace. For most patrons, Bellissimo was a sophisticated haven, a place to see and be seen. But for a select few, Bellissimo was also considered neutral territory, a safe meeting point in a city quietly carved up by invisible borders of power and influence. At the entrance to the dining room, Emma Carson smoothed the front of her black apron and took a deep breath to steady herself. She had been working at Bellissimo for only 5 months and still struggled with the feeling that she didn't quite belong in this polished, glittering environment. The 24-year-old waitress had grown up in a far humbler part of the city, worlds away from the wealthy bankers and high society members who frequented this establishment. Every shift, she felt like an imposter in a borrowed uniform. Still, she desperately needed this job, so every shift she pushed herself to make it through the evening. Tonight, though, a ripple of tension hung in the air. Emma noticed the restaurant manager nervously adjusting his tie repeatedly, and the head waiter was hissing whispered instructions to the staff. Something was different. Word had spread that a particularly notorious guest had reserved the private corner booth for a late dinner. Even someone like Emma, who tried to avoid city gossip, had heard the name Marcus Santoro whispered with a mixture of fear and reverence. Santoro was said to control a significant portion of New York's underworld. Some claimed he ran it entirely, along with a few other crime family heads. Most law-abiding citizens knew him only through sensational headlines, if they knew him at all. But those in certain circles understood that wherever Marcus Santoro went, trouble often followed, and now he was coming here. Emma's stomach twisted with nerves when she realized she might be serving the Mafia boss's table. She finished polishing a wine glass with trembling fingers. Of all nights to be on duty, of course it had to be this one. Emma desperately hoped to keep her head down and simply survive the evening without any problems. Before long, a hush fell over the restaurant as a small group strolled in through the ornate double doors. At its center stood a tall, broad-shouldered man in an exquisitely tailored charcoal suit. He moved with an unhurried confidence, flanked by several men who scanned the room with sharp, watchful eyes. Emma knew immediately who he must be. The photographs in the newspapers hadn't done Marcus Santoro justice. In person, the crime boss had a commanding presence that seemed to electrify the very air around him. Dark hair, neatly trimmed and swept back, framed a strong, clean-shaven jaw. He possessed the kind of striking, cold handsomeness that turned heads everywhere, but it was the intensity in his eyes that truly unsettled her. Even from across the room, Emma could feel the weight of that gaze as Santoro briefly surveyed Bellissimo like he owned the entire place. A hostess escorted Santoro and his party to the secluded corner booth that had been specially prepared for them. Crisp white napkins had already been arranged at the place settings, and water glasses stood ready. As he sat down, Santoro exchanged a few quiet words with an older gentleman beside him, an advisor or bodyguard, Emma guessed. The rest of his men took their seats, the atmosphere at the table tense yet oddly casual, as if this were simultaneously a social outing and a business meeting. Emma's throat went dry as the head waiter motioned for her to attend that booth. Of course, she was one of the few servers available at the moment, and this table required the most experienced attention. She swallowed hard and approached with her pen and notepad clutched tightly, careful to keep her expression polite and neutral. "Good evening," Emma said softly, willing her voice not to shake, as she gave a small nod to the formidable man at the head of the table. "Welcome to Bellissimo. My name is Emma, and I'll be taking care of your table tonight." Her eyes flickered over the group cautiously. Marcus Santoro's steel-gray eyes lifted to Emma, pinning her in place. Under that piercing scrutiny, she felt almost like a butterfly pinned under glass, but he merely gave a curt nod of acknowledgement, allowing her to proceed. Emma recited the evening specials from memory, her practiced server smile concealing her nerves. One of the men, a heavy-set guy with a shaved head, cut her off halfway through, barking his drink order without so much as a glance. "Bourbon on the rocks, and keep them coming," he said gruffly. Another quickly added, "Make that 2." Emma noted the orders with a quick scribble. The others murmured their preferences more politely, perhaps picking up on Santoro's silence and knowing better than to draw attention. Finally, Emma looked to Santoro himself. He had been studying her, one hand idly toying with the base of his water glass. "And for you, sir?" she asked, amazed at how steady she managed to sound. The corner of his mouth lifted faintly. "Barolo classico," he replied in a low voice that was surprisingly smooth. "Thank you, Emma." Hearing her name from his lips sent a strange little jolt through her chest. She quickly bowed her head and stepped away to submit their orders, exhaling shakily the moment she was out of their immediate orbit. As she entered the drink orders at the server station, Emma's colleague and friend Rachel sidled up beside her. Rachel's eyes were wide. "You got that table," she whispered, clearly referring to the Santoro party. Emma just nodded, not trusting herself to speak yet. Her hands were trembling slightly as she pressed the buttons on the register. Rachel gave her a sympathetic squeeze on the arm. "Be careful, okay? I heard he can be unpredictable. Don't mess up any orders, and definitely don't spill anything on him," she added with a half-serious, half-teasing smirk. Emma mustered a tiny laugh. "Believe me, I intend to be a picture of perfection." Inside, her stomach was doing anxious flips. She knew Rachel was trying to lighten the mood, but the warning was warranted. Marcus Santoro wasn't some regular VIP. He was potentially dangerous. A few minutes later, Emma returned to the private booth with a tray of drinks balanced on her palm. She could feel the guarded eyes of Santoro's men following her every move. As she carefully set each glass in front of the correct person, the conversation at the table hushed. The men had been speaking in low, indistinct tones, but they fell silent as she approached, presumably not wanting an outsider to overhear any sensitive talk. Emma's curiosity prickled despite herself. What sort of business did powerful criminals discuss over dinner? She pushed the thought away. Eavesdropping on Marcus Santoro was the last thing she should do if she valued her job and possibly her safety. She placed the 2 bourbons in front of the impatient pair who had ordered them. They barely paused their murmured side conversation to grunt thanks. The older advisor received his glass of red wine with a polite nod to her. Lastly, Emma stepped toward Santoro, who watched her steadily. She gently set the goblet of deep crimson Barolo at his right hand. "Your wine, sir," she said quietly. Santoro's eyes flicked up from the wine to meet hers. "Grazie," he said softly. "Thank you," in Italian. Emma recognized the word. She had spent a semester studying abroad in Florence during an abortive attempt at university and picked up some of the language. The unexpected courtesy and use of Italian surprised her. She hadn't anticipated manners from a man with such a fearsome reputation. Caught off guard, Emma offered a hesitant smile before she could think better of it. Marcus Santoro tilted his head slightly, as if something about her piqued his interest, but he said nothing more, merely turning to give a pointed look at the man to his left. Taking the cue, the underling cleared his throat and reached into his suit jacket. "We'll take the 2003 Brunello with dinner," the man said to Emma, handing her the wine list back. Clearly, that was their choice of bottle for the meal. Emma nodded and promised to return shortly to take their food orders after they'd had a chance to review the menus. Escaping once more to the periphery of the dining room, Emma allowed herself a slow exhale. So far, so good. She hadn't dropped anything or offended anyone. Santoro and his men were settling in, and with any luck, they would dine and depart without incident. If only her nerves would settle. Emma glanced over now and then as she went about tending to her other tables. The Santoro party seemed engaged in quiet discussion while sipping their drinks. She noticed Marco Santoro rarely spoke, mostly listening with an unreadable expression as his men murmured updates or opinions. From the snatches of conversation she caught while passing by, it sounded like they were discussing various business ventures, clubs, construction projects, shipments. Normal topics for wealthy businessmen, perhaps, though Emma suspected these had criminal undertones. As Emma waited for the sommelier to fetch the requested Brunello from the cellar, she busied herself by straightening clean napkins and polishing cutlery at the service stand. Her mind wandered to more mundane worries: the stack of bills awaiting her at home, her upcoming weekend class at the community college, the fact that her worn-out sneakers would need replacing soon. She had recently re-enrolled in night courses to finish her degree in accounting, scraping together tuition with tips from Bellissimo. It was exhausting, balancing coursework after late shifts, but Emma refused to give up on her dream of entering the financial world legitimately someday. "If I can just get through a few more semesters," she thought to herself, wiping a spotless fork for the 3rd time. The money from this job was the linchpin of her plans. Finally, the sommelier returned with the expensive Brunello. Emma delivered the bottle to the table and poured a taste for Santoro's advisor to sample. He swirled and approved, and she deftly filled each glass. Next, she took their dinner orders, a process thankfully free of any drama. Marco Santoro chose the osso buco special, meeting her gaze as he ordered in what almost felt like a challenge, though she couldn't guess why. Emma just nodded respectfully and collected their menus. Once the men fell back into conversation, Emma retreated and relayed the order to the kitchen. Everything was proceeding smoothly. With the meals underway, she checked on her other tables and refilled a few drinks across the room. Perhaps her fears had been unfounded. Maybe this would be an ordinary night after all, despite the notorious company in the corner. She was just returning from dropping off a tray of appetizers at a nearby table when she overheard a raised voice from the direction of Santoro's booth. "Losing money hand over fist. At this rate, we'll be hemorrhaging cash this quarter," someone was saying tensely. Emma slowed her steps instinctively, her ears catching the frustration in the tone. It sounded like one of Santoro's men. "I told you the numbers from the Westfield deal don't add up," another man muttered. "We might need to cut our losses, boss." Emma tried to mind her own business, but it was impossible not to hear the annoyance spilling from their hushed, private discussion. She kept her back partially turned, pretending to be absorbed in adjusting the angle of a nearby table's candle. A deeper voice laced with impatience cut through the others. "Santoro himself. Every time we invest in something legitimate, it's the same story," he said coldly. "I hire so-called experts to handle the finances, and still I'm hearing excuses. Perhaps I should just set my money on fire. At least that would save time." There was a low, uneasy chuckle from one of the men, as if unsure whether to laugh. Emma's lips pressed together. She could practically feel the tension radiating from their booth now. Another man spoke up, trying to sound confident. "Boss, if we just raise the cover charges at the clubs and maybe trim some payroll, we can make up the shortfall." Marcus Santoro made a dismissive noise. "Bleed the customers and squeeze our own people. That's your brilliant solution, Tony," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. The one called Tony fell silent. Clearly, that suggestion had not pleased Santoro. Emma realized she was loitering dangerously close. She should move away, but in that moment, Marcus Santoro's gaze flickered up and landed directly on her. She was still half turned away with her hand on the back of an empty chair. Their eyes met, his sharp and assessing, hers wide with alarm at being caught lingering. "Miss!" Santoro called out to her suddenly, his voice cutting across the low murmurs. Emma nearly jumped. Her mind raced. Had he noticed her eavesdropping? Was he about to have her fired for prying? Slowly, she turned fully to face the booth, clutching her tray to her chest. "Yes, sir. Did you need something?" Emma asked cautiously. Marcus Santoro's expression was unreadable, that slight half-smile ghosting over his lips again. His men were all looking at her now, some with curiosity, others with annoyance at the interruption. Tony in particular, the burly man who had suggested raising prices, was eyeing Emma with a frown. Santoro tapped a finger against the stem of his wineglass. "Forgive me for pulling you into this," he said, "but we seem to be having a little debate over here." He gestured vaguely at his companions. "Tell me, Emma, what do you think a business should do if it's hemorrhaging money?" For a second, Emma was sure she hadn't heard him correctly. Had the city's most feared crime lord really just asked her, a random waitress, for business advice, and in such a casual tone, as if genuinely seeking her opinion? Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. This had to be some kind of test or a trap. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Every instinct screamed at her to laugh it off, to say, "I wouldn't know, sir," and back away as quickly as possible. But in Marcus Santoro's expectant gaze, she sensed a challenge and perhaps genuine curiosity. The other men at the table were staring at her, one or two with barely hidden smirks, anticipating her embarrassment. Emma flushed. They clearly expected her to stutter or say something foolish. She could feel Rachel's eyes on her from across the room and remembered her friend's advice. Don't mess up. This was definitely not what Rachel had meant, but the thought steadied Emma's spine. If she humiliated herself now, she might not only lose her job. Who knew how a man like Santoro would react? Perhaps honesty and straightforwardness would serve her better than cowering. Emma moistened her dry lips. Well, she began carefully, her voice quiet but growing steadier as she forced herself to speak. If a business is losing money, simply squeezing more out of customers or staff might only fix things short term. It could drive people away and hurt the business in the long run. A couple of Santoro's men exchanged looks. Tony, the one who had made that suggestion and earned Santoro's scorn, folded his arms and glared at her openly now. Emma's cheeks burned, but she continued, addressing Marcus Santoro, though she could hardly believe she was doing so. Sometimes the issue isn't that customers won't pay or that employees aren't worth their cost, she said. Sometimes money is disappearing somewhere in the pipeline. She paused meaningfully. It could be an accounting error or someone taking a cut before the earnings are reported. At that, the faint amusement on Santoro's face faded, replaced by a keener interest. The booth had fallen utterly silent. Emma was sure she'd gone too far. Why on earth had she practically insinuated in front of Santoro and his crew that one of them might be stealing? She braced herself for an explosion of anger. The eruption came, but not from Santoro. Tony lurched forward, one beefy hand slapping the table. "What exactly are you implying?" he growled at Emma. His ruddy face darkened with either rage or anxiety, perhaps both. "You think we can't manage our own books? That's rich coming from a girl who balances dinner trays for a living." "Tony." Santoro's voice cut through the man's words like a blade, cold, quiet, but undeniably commanding. Tony immediately closed his mouth, though his glare at Emma remained. Emma's heart was in her throat. She couldn't move, pinned by a mixture of fear and the adrenaline of what she just dared to say. She quickly looked down at her feet, suddenly very aware of the dangerous line she had crossed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to presume," she stammered quickly. But Marcus Santoro held up a finger, silencing her apology. "No need to apologize," he said evenly, eyes still fixed on her. He leaned back in his chair, considering Emma with that same unreadable expression. "In fact, I believe you may be onto something." The faint clink of silverware and distant chatter of other diners were the only sounds in the stunned silence that followed. Emma stared at Marcus Santoro, unsure she'd heard him correctly. He thought she was onto something. Was that agreement in his tone? Santoro turned his head slowly to sweep his gaze over his men. "Tomorrow morning, I want a full audit of the Westfield accounts," he stated, voice deceptively calm. The directive was clearly aimed at the entire table, though Tony in particular visibly tensed. Every invoice, every expense. If there's a leak, we'll find it. Emma remained rooted to the spot, scarcely daring to breathe. Her mind raced to process that her bold suggestion hadn't gotten her killed or fired, but was actually being taken seriously by this dangerous man. Marcus Santoro's attention returned to Emma. The slightest hint of a genuine smile tugged at the edge of his mouth. "Miss Carson, it seems I owe you thanks," he said, inclining his head graciously. Emma was sure every person within earshot, including herself, nearly fell over in shock. Mafia bosses did not just thank random waitresses. "I was only answering your question," Emma managed, voice faltering. Her face felt hot. "I hope I didn't overstep." Santoro waved a hand dismissively. "On the contrary, honest answers are hard to come by these days. His steel-gray eyes glinted with something like approval. "You have a good head on your shoulders." Emma couldn't believe what she was hearing. A few seats away, Tony looked positively sour but said nothing. The others observed the exchange with interest and perhaps a touch of amusement. Then came the moment that truly left Emma lightheaded. Marcus Santoro leaned forward and addressed her directly in that low, commanding tone. "Tell me, Emma," he asked, "where did you learn about business and finance? You speak like someone with expertise." Emma blinked. Was he actually asking about her background now, in front of his whole crew? She swallowed. "I take night classes at City College," she said quietly. "I was studying accounting at a university before, but had to drop out. Now I'm finishing my degree part-time," she added hastily. "I'm not an expert or anything. I just pick up on some things." Santoro arched an eyebrow, interest evident. "Is that so?" It wasn't phrased as a question. He regarded her thoughtfully for a moment, fingertips pressed together. "A waitress who knows how to spot a balance sheet problem. Life is full of surprises." Emma's heart thumped. She gripped the edges of her tray to keep her hands from shaking. Was it her imagination, or did Marcus Santoro almost sound impressed? He exchanged a glance with the older advisor beside him, who gave a slight nod as if confirming something unspoken. Then Santoro's focus returned to Emma, and he said the words that would replay in her head for days. "Perhaps I could use someone with your instincts. How would you like to put that accounting knowledge to use working for me?" Emma's jaw nearly dropped. A collective blink went around the table. Tony coughed as if he couldn't believe his ears. One of the other men failed to hide a grin of surprise behind his hand. "Work for you?" Emma echoed dumbly. She was certain she must have misheard this time. Her work for a mob boss? Marcus Santoro actually chuckled, a low sound that made it unclear whether he was joking or not. "I'm in need of people I can trust, people with brains," he said. "It sounds like you might qualify on both counts." Emma felt her face go through a whole cycle of expressions: astonishment, disbelief, confusion. This had to be some kind of strange test or humor at her expense. She could hardly form a response. "I don't," she stuttered, glancing around. Every man at the booth was watching her intently now, and she realized she had to say something. "That's a very generous offer, Mr. Santoro," she managed carefully, "but I'm just a waitress." "Yes, I know," Santoro finished for her, still with that slight smile. "But clearly more than that." Emma opened her mouth, still utterly at a loss. Her tongue felt tied in knots. Was he serious? His expression looked calm and sincere, but who could tell? Her heart drummed wildly. Work for a Mafia boss? Doing what exactly? Handling blood-stained money. That didn't exactly line up with her career goals in accounting. And yet, part of her felt an undeniable thrill at the audacity of his suggestion. She realized Marcus Santoro was patiently awaiting her answer, as were all his men. Her gaze flickered to Tony, who still looked like he'd bitten into a lemon. Intuition told Emma that accepting too eagerly might paint a target on her back with certain folks at this table. And, truthfully, she had no idea what such work would even entail. "Maybe," she said weakly. "Maybe we could discuss it later." Santoro inclined his head, understanding the weight of her hesitation in this public setting. "Of course." "Another time, then," he agreed smoothly. "Think it over." He reached inside his suit jacket. Emma tensed for a split second, but he simply pulled out a small black leather card holder. From it, He withdrew a business card and held it between 2 fingers. Emma gingerly stepped forward to take it, hoping no one noticed the tremble in her hand as she did. The card was thick, ivory-colored with embossed lettering. It displayed only a name, Marcus Santoro, and a phone number in elegant type. No title, no company name, none needed. "This number is for my office," Santoro said. Emma noted the subtle phrasing, implying the number would reach his assistant, perhaps. "When you decide you're ready to talk, call. I'd hate to see talent go to waste." His eyes bore into her, making clear that his offer was genuine. "Thank you," Emma murmured. She slid the card carefully into the pocket of her apron, her mind still reeling. "Good." Santoro nodded once, then casually lifted his hand in a small gesture of dismissal. "That will be all for now, Emma." The sudden return to formality was almost jarring. Emma remembered abruptly that she was at work and she'd been standing here entangled in conversation far longer than was appropriate. Heat rushed to her cheeks. "Of course, sir." "Enjoy your meal," she stammered. She retreated a few steps, her legs feeling like rubber, then turned and hurried off toward the kitchen, needing a moment away from those penetrating stares. Only when she was safely in the bustling kitchen corridor did Emma let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for 10 minutes. She leaned back against the wall beside a rack of clean plates, pressing a hand to her forehead. Did all of that just happen? Rachel poked her head around the corner, eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Oh my God, Emma," she hissed. "I caught bits and pieces. Did he actually offer you a job, or did I imagine that?" Emma let out a shaky laugh. "I think he did. I'm not entirely sure myself." Rachel's jaw dropped, then she grinned. "Girl, only you could turn waiting tables into a corporate recruitment by the mob." "Don't joke," Emma pleaded, though a disbelieving laugh bubbled out of her as well. Now that she was out of the spotlight, a sort of giddiness and relief washed over her. She hadn't embarrassed herself. In fact, she seemed to have impressed Marcus Santoro and survived doing so. "I mean it." "Be careful," Rachel said more seriously, gently touching Emma's arm. "This is probably not a normal job offer. Well, you know who he is." Emma nodded, sobering. "I know." "Trust me. I know." She absently fingered the edge of the business card in her apron pocket. Part of her was inclined to toss it out and pretend this conversation never occurred. What business did she have even considering stepping one foot into that world? She'd worked hard to keep her life honest and her nose clean despite hardships. Yet another part of her, a small voice in the back of her mind, whispered that this might be a once-in-a-lifetime chance. A door unexpectedly cracked open. What lay behind it was uncertain, opportunity, danger, or both. For now, she had to get through the rest of her shift. Smoothing her hair and straightening her apron, Emma forced her racing thoughts aside. The kitchen had prepared the Santoro table's appetizers, and she needed to deliver them. When Emma emerged again into the dining area balancing a tray of antipasti, she found the tension at Marcus Santoro's booth noticeably diffused. The men had resumed their low conversations, though Tony sat stone-faced and silent. Santoro himself was chatting quietly with the older advisor, swirling his wine occasionally and appearing utterly at ease once more. As Emma served their dishes, bruschetta, a platter of fine cheeses and cured meats, the men thanked her curtly or with polite nods. Marcus Santoro caught her eye as she set down a plate of imported olives near him. "Thank you, Emma," he said softly, his tone cordial. "If one didn't know better, It would seem like he was just another gracious patron, and she a favored waitress. "You're welcome, sir," Emma replied, lowering her gaze deferentially. Her pulse quickened when he continued to watch her for a second longer than necessary. There was an undeniable spark of curiosity and regard in his eyes that hadn't been there at the start of the evening. Emma withdrew again, and the night moved on. She stayed busy with her duties, refilling drinks, bringing out entrees when they were ready, and doing her best to remain professional. Inside, though, her mind turned over the surreal exchange that had taken place. Each time she dared glance at the corner booth, she found Santoro focused on his companions or on his meal. But a few times she caught one of his men, especially Tony, throwing a dark look her way. She kept her distance and decided it was best not to approach unless summoned. Eventually, dessert and coffee were offered, but Santoro declined. It seemed they were wrapping up. Emma helped clear away their plates. The crime boss's party prepared to depart into the late evening, shrugging on coats and settling the bill discreetly with the manager at the booth. Bellissimo had a policy of handling checks at the table for privacy, especially with high-profile clients. Emma hung back politely while her manager, Mr. Romano, personally attended to Marco Santoro, who signed the receipt with a flourish. Santoro then stood, pushing in his chair. His men rose as well. Emma stepped forward, knowing it was part of her job to thank them for dining and bid them good night. Despite everything that had happened, habit took over. "Thank you very much for joining us this evening," she said, hoping her voice sounded steady. "Have a wonderful night." Her eyes flickered to Santoro as she spoke. Marcus Santoro shrugged on a long, dark overcoat that one of his bodyguards held for him. Once he was settled in it, he turned to Emma. To her surprise, he extended his hand, not in a handshake exactly, but as if about to perform a genteel gesture. Unsure, Emma lifted her own hand. He took it lightly, his large palm warm and fingers paradoxically gentle as they closed over hers. "The pleasure was ours," Santoro said, looking at her with that penetrating gaze. "I hope to see you again, Emma." Emma's breath caught for an instant. There was weight in those words beyond a simple pleasantry. "Likewise, Mr. Santoro," she managed softly, his lips curved in that faint smile one last time. Then he released her hand and nodded to his men. With that, Marcus Santoro strode out of Bellissimo, his entourage following in tight formation. The door swung shut behind them, and the ambient noise of the restaurant swelled back to normal, as if the air pressure had changed now that he was gone. It was only once the group's black cars outside had pulled away from the curb that the staff of Bellissimo collectively exhaled and began buzzing. Several waiters rushed up to Emma. "What did he say to you? Did he really offer you a job? Are you okay?" The questions flew, half excited and half concerned. Emma answered as best she could. "Yes, apparently he did ask me to work for him. And no, I'm not sure what I'll do. Yes, I'm fine, just shocked." Mr. Romano approached, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. The manager looked simultaneously relieved and exhausted. "Miss Carson," he said in a low tone, pulling her slightly aside from the babbling co-workers, "Mr. Santoro left something for you." Emma's heart skipped. Left something? Romano held out an envelope, a thick cream-colored one like those used for greeting cards. Her name was scrolled across the front in an elegant penmanship. She recognized the handwriting at once. It must be Marco Santoro's. Hands suddenly clammy. Emma accepted the envelope and peeked inside. Her eyes widened. There was a stack of crisp bills, $100 notes from the glimpse of Benjamin Franklin's face on the top bill. Alongside the cash was a short note on Bellissimo's stationery. "Thank you for your invaluable insight." MS Emma looked back at her manager, mouth open in protest. "This is too much. I can't accept." Mr. Romano held up a hand. "It's yours." "Believe me, you don't want to refuse a gift from Mr. Santoro," he said with a knowing, wary smile. "Consider it a very generous tip. Off the books." Emma swallowed and nodded slowly. She couldn't begin to count it now in front of everyone, but from the thickness she guessed it had to be thousands of dollars. Never in her life had she received a tip of this magnitude. It felt like a lead weight in her hands, a blessing and a burden. Afterward, as the excitement died down, Emma finished her closing duties in a distracted haze. She stored the envelope carefully in her bag, already planning to lock it in her apartment safe box as soon as she got home. She changed out of her uniform and clocked out, saying goodbye to Rachel and her colleagues while deflecting their playful insistence that she treat them all after landing such a windfall. The night air had a chill as Emma stepped outside the restaurant into the nearly empty street. It was past midnight, and her feet ached from hours on the floor, but she barely felt the pain. She stood for a moment under a street lamp, breath visible in the cold, letting reality wash over her. An ordinary work shift had turned into something extraordinary. She had met Marcus Santoro, somehow impressed him enough that he'd offered her a job or something like it, and pressed a small fortune into her hands as a tip. Emma's thoughts were a whirlwind on the taxi ride back to her tiny apartment across town. By the time she tumbled into bed, she still hadn't fully processed what to do about any of it. The business card sat on her bedside table, seeming to taunt her with possibilities. Exhaustion eventually overtook her racing mind, but as she drifted to sleep in the early hours of morning, one thought repeated itself. Her life might have just changed, and there might be no going back to the way things were. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of Emma's small apartment the next morning, waking her far too early after the tumultuous night. She groaned softly and rolled over, but almost immediately her eyes snapped open as memories flooded back. It hadn't been a dream. The restaurant, Marcus Santoro, the outrageous job offer, the envelope of cash sitting in her bag across the room, all of it was real. Emma sat up and rubbed her face. "What now?" she whispered to herself. Her first impulse was to treat it like any other morning. Brew a cup of coffee, get ready for the day, maybe review her notes for her Saturday accounting class. But normal routine seemed impossible. She padded over to her cluttered desk where she'd tossed her purse the night before. With a deep breath, she pulled out the sealed envelope. Sitting cross-legged on her bed, Emma carefully counted the money inside. $12,000. She let out a low whistle. It was more cash than she'd ever held in her life. It could pay 4 months of rent, her next semester's tuition, and still leave plenty for daily expenses. It was also undeniably Mafia money, a thought that made her uneasy. Emma set the bills aside and unfolded the little note Marcus had written. "Thank you for your invaluable insight. MS," she read again under her breath. The initials were penned in a bold, confident stroke. She traced them with her fingertip, biting her lip. Why did those 2 letters send a small thrill through her? She shook her head, trying to ground herself. After a quick shower and a much-needed coffee, Emma sat at her laptop. Maybe burying herself in something familiar, like finances, would help her think clearly. On a whim, She logged into her college's student portal to check her tuition balance, which was due next week. It was one of the many worries swirling in her mind lately. The screen loaded and Emma nearly spat out her coffee. The balance due as of this morning showed her tuition was marked paid in full for the semester. A notation read, "Payment received." "Thank you." Her heart skipped a beat. There was no mistaking it. Someone had paid her tuition overnight. No, not someone. She could guess exactly who. Marcus Santoro must have had his people find out her school and student account. Maybe when she mentioned taking night classes, he'd taken it upon himself to... Emma pressed a hand to her mouth, equal parts grateful and alarmed. This was not a casual gesture. Paying thousands of dollars of her tuition without even asking, it was overwhelming. Generous, yes, and it would lift a huge burden off her shoulders, but it also meant he was serious about courting her skills, and perhaps he was making sure she had reasons to say yes. Her phone buzzed on the bedside table, startling her. Emma lunged and snatched it up, half expecting to see an unknown number that could be Santoro's, but it was her friend Rachel. She answered, and immediately Rachel's excited chatter came through. "Emma, did you survive? What's going on? Spill everything. Have you called him yet?" Emma managed a wry smile. Rachel never wasted time. "Good morning to you, too," she said. "I just woke up. You know, I couldn't sleep last night wondering if you'd actually consider working for a mob boss." Rachel's tone mixed concern and disbelief. "It's insane, right? You're not really going to, are you?" Emma sank back onto her bed, sighing. "Rach, I don't know. Probably not. I mean, it's crazy. I can't just dive into that world." "Exactly," Rachel said firmly. "I mean, sure, the money could be amazing and he's, well, very handsome in a dangerous sort of way." "Rachel," Emma protested, though her cheeks warmed because she couldn't deny that observation. "What? I'm just saying, he's trouble wrapped in a designer suit, babe." "Don't get seduced by that." Her friend's voice softened. "I care about you. I don't want you hurt or caught up in something illegal." Emma closed her eyes. "I know you're right." She paused, then admitted quietly, "He already paid my entire tuition, Rachel." There was a dead silence on the line for a moment. "He what?" "Yeah, I just checked, and it's zeroed out. He must have done it after leaving the restaurant." Emma ran a hand through her damp hair. "I haven't even spoken to him since last night, and he's already this involved." Rachel let out a low whistle akin to what Emma had done earlier. Wow, I mean, that's kind of sweet, but also kind of terrifying. Like marking his territory or something. It feels like pressure," Emma murmured. "How can I accept that and then not at least talk to him about this job?" "Maybe you can pay it back if you decide not to get involved," Rachel offered. "He gave you tip money too, right? But then you probably can't match whatever he just paid." Emma eyed the stack of cash on her bed. "He paid more than what he tipped me. I'm guessing my tuition was no small amount." Rachel sighed. "Be careful, okay? If you do call him, and it sounds like you will, just promise you'll keep your guard up. Don't agree to anything on the spot, and you can always back out if it's too much." "Promise," Emma said. "I'm just going to feel him out, that's all." After hanging up, Emma found herself holding Marcus Santoro's card, running her thumb along the embossed letters. She took a steadying breath and dialed the number. It rang only once before a crisp male voice answered. "Mr. Santoro's office." Emma hadn't expected a secretary or assistant. For some reason, she thought he'd given her a direct line. "Oh, hello. This is Emma Carson. Mr. Santoro asked me to call." There was a brief pause. Then the man responded with professional warmth. "Ah, Miss Carson. Yes, mister. Santoro is expecting your call. One moment, please." Expecting it. Emma's heart thumped as she heard a click and a line transfer. Almost immediately, Marcus Santoro's voice came through, rich and smooth over the phone. "Emma," he said, and just her name sounded different coming from him. Intimate somehow, even over the phone. "I'm glad you called." Emma found herself smiling nervously. "Good morning, Mr. Santoro." A low chuckle. "It's Marcos, please. After last night, I think first names are appropriate, don't you?" She flushed, remembering how he'd held her hand when departing. "Oh, okay, Marcus." It felt very personal to address him so, but she continued. "I wanted to thank you for everything. The tip you left and," she hesitated, deciding to be direct, "and for paying my tuition. You didn't have to do that." "Consider it an investment," Marcus replied smoothly. "In talent. You have potential, Emma, and I believe in nurturing potential when I see it." His voice dropped slightly. "Besides, you helped me identify a problem that could have cost me significantly more. It's only fair." Emma bit her lip. "Still, it's very generous. I'm not sure what to say. Say you'll meet with me," Marcus said. "Just a conversation. No pressure, no commitment. I'd like to discuss what working together might look like. You can decide afterward if it's something that interests you." Emma's pulse quickened. A meeting, in person, with Marcus Santoro. The very thought sent a mixture of excitement and anxiety coursing through her. "Where would we meet?" she asked cautiously. "Somewhere public," Marcus said immediately, as if anticipating her concern. "Neutral ground. There's a cafe in Midtown, La Perla. Do you know it?" Emma did know it. A quiet upscale coffee shop frequented by business people. Very public, very safe. "I know the place," she said. "When?" "Tomorrow afternoon? Say 2:00, Marcus suggested. "That gives you time to think, and it's broad daylight. You can bring a friend if it makes you more comfortable." The offer surprised her. Most people with something to hide wouldn't want witnesses, but Marcos seemed genuinely interested in making her feel safe. "Tomorrow at 2 works," Emma heard herself say. "I'll be there." "Excellent," Marcus said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I look forward to it, Emma. Until tomorrow, then." "Until tomorrow," she echoed softly. The line clicked off and Emma sat staring at her phone, wondering what she'd just agreed to. But beneath the nervousness, there was undeniable curiosity. What exactly did Marcus Santoro want from her? And more importantly, was she brave enough to find out? The next afternoon, Emma stood outside La Perla Café, smoothing down her simple black dress and trying to calm her racing heart. She'd chosen something professional but not too formal, wanting to strike the right balance. Rachel had offered to come along and wait at a nearby table, but Emma had declined. This was something she needed to do alone. Through the cafe's large windows, she spotted Marcus Santoro immediately. He sat at a corner table, dressed in a dark suit but without the tie, the top button of his crisp white shirt undone. He looked more relaxed than he had at the restaurant, but no less commanding. As if sensing her presence, he glanced up and their eyes met through the glass. He stood immediately, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that caught her off guard. Emma pushed through the door, and Marcus moved to greet her. "Emma," he said warmly, extending his hand, "thank you for coming." She shook his hand, noting again how his grip was firm but gentle. "Thank you for inviting me," she replied, hoping her voice didn't betray her nerves. Marcus pulled out a chair for her and Emma sat, feeling strangely like this was a date rather than a business meeting. A waiter appeared almost instantly, and Marcus ordered an espresso. Emma requested a cappuccino, needing something to occupy her hands. Once they were alone, Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. "I imagine you have questions," he said. Emma nodded. "A few, yes. Starting with, what exactly would this job entail?" "I'm not going to lie to you, Emma," Marcus said, his directness surprising her. "My business interests are, shall we say, diverse. Some are legitimate, some operate in gray areas. What I need is someone I can trust to help me transition more of my operations into legitimate enterprises." Emma's eyebrows rose. "You want to go legitimate?" "Parts of my organization, yes," Marcus confirmed. "I'm not getting younger, and the landscape is changing. Law enforcement is getting smarter, more aggressive. I've built an empire, but I want something that will last. Something that won't crumble the moment the feds decide to make an example of me." "And you think I can help with that?" Emma said slowly. Marcus leaned forward, intensity radiating from him. "You spotted a leak in my finances within 30 seconds of overhearing a conversation," he said. "You have instincts, education, and most importantly, you're not part of this world. You don't have the baggage, the old loyalties, the corruption that comes with years in my business. You see things clearly." Emma absorbed this, her mind working through the implications. "What happened with the audit?" she asked. "Did you find the leak?" Marcus's expression darkened slightly. "We did. Tony, the man who got defensive when you made your suggestion, had been skimming for months over $2 million in falsified expenses and shell companies." Emma's eyes widened. $2 million? Marcus nodded grimly. "He's been dealt with." Emma didn't ask what that meant. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. "And you think there might be more?" she said. Marcus's slight smile confirmed it. "I'm certain of it. My organization has grown too large, too complex. I need fresh eyes, someone who understands finance and isn't afraid to tell me the truth." The waiter returned with their drinks, and Emma took a sip of her cappuccino, using the moment to collect her thoughts. "This is a lot to process," she said finally. "I appreciate your honesty, but I have to be honest too. I've worked hard to stay on the right side of the law. Getting involved in," she gestured vaguely, "this world, it goes against everything I've been trying to build for myself." Marcus nodded, as if he'd expected this. "I understand, and I respect that. Which is precisely why I want you, Emma. I don't need another criminal helping me hide money. I need someone who can help me build legitimate businesses, clean operations that will stand up to scrutiny." He paused, meeting her eyes. "I'm offering you a chance to do exactly what you've been studying for, to use your skills in real-world applications that matter. The pay would be substantial, far more than you'd make starting out at any accounting firm." "How substantial?" Emma asked, then immediately felt embarrassed for being so direct about money. Marcus didn't seem offended. He named a figure that made Emma's cappuccino nearly go down the wrong pipe. She coughed, eyes watering. That's more than most experienced accountants make," she managed. "You'd be taking on more risk than most accountants," Marcus pointed out, "and you'd be reporting directly to me, handling sensitive information. The compensation reflects that." He leaned forward again. "Emma, I'm not asking you to do anything illegal. I'm asking you to help me identify problems, optimize operations, and transition my holdings into legitimate ventures. If anything, you'd be helping me become less of a criminal." Emma couldn't help but laugh at the irony of that statement. "So I'd be rehabilitating a mob boss," she said. Marcus's lips quirked. "If you want to put it that way. Think of it as corporate restructuring with higher stakes." Emma shook her head, still processing. "What about safety? If people like Tony were stealing from you and got caught, there must be others who wouldn't be happy about an outsider coming in and examining the books." Marcus's expression turned serious. "I won't lie to you. There would be risks. But you'd have my full protection. Anyone who touched you would answer to me personally, and everyone in my organization knows what that means. You'd also have security, drivers, anything you need to feel safe." Emma bit her lip, her practical side warring with her curiosity. "Can I think about it?" she asked. Marcus smiled. "Of course. This isn't a decision to make lightly. Take all the time you need." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table. "These are some of my legitimate businesses. Nightclubs, restaurants, real estate holdings. Look them over. If you decide to accept, these would be your starting point." Emma opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. Financial statements, business licenses, profit and loss reports. It all looked surprisingly normal, professional even. She looked up at Marcus, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "You could hire any number of experienced accountants or financial consultants. Why a waitress who's still finishing her degree?" Marcus was silent for a moment, considering his answer. "Because you're not jaded yet," he said finally. "You haven't learned to overlook things or justify questionable practices. You see a problem and you speak up, even when it's dangerous to do so. That kind of integrity is rare, Emma, especially in my world." He paused. "And because I trust my instincts about people, something told me the moment you challenged my men's suggestions that you were different." Emma felt her cheeks warm under his intense gaze. She looked down at the folder, using it as an excuse to break eye contact. "I'll look these over," she said, "and I'll give you my answer soon." Marcus nodded, seeming satisfied. "That's all I ask." He signaled for the check, which the waiter brought immediately. As Marcus paid, Emma gathered the folder, tucking it carefully into her bag. They stood and Marcus walked her to the door. "Thank you for hearing me out," he said. "Whatever you decide, I meant what I said. You have talent, Emma. Don't let it go to waste in some dead-end job." His words stayed with her as she walked away from the cafe, the folder in her bag feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Over the next few days, Emma pored over the documents Marcus had given her. She spread them across her small kitchen table, making notes, calculating ratios, analyzing trends. Despite her reservations about the source, she had to admit the businesses were impressive. The nightclubs alone generated significant revenue, and the real estate portfolio was diversified and valuable. But it was what she found in the margins that intrigued her most: inefficiencies, missed opportunities, areas where profits were being left on the table due to poor management or outdated practices. Her fingers itched to fix them, to optimize and streamline. This was exactly the kind of work she'd been training for, the kind of challenge that made her pulse race with excitement. Rachel came over one evening, finding Emma surrounded by spreadsheets and financial reports. "You're seriously considering this, aren't you?" her friend said, not quite a question. Emma looked up, pushing her reading glasses up onto her head. "I think I am," she admitted. "Rach, look at this." She pointed to a profit and loss statement. This nightclub is barely breaking even, but if they adjusted their pricing structure and cut overhead by 20%, they could triple their profit margin. Rachel sat down, shaking her head in disbelief. You're getting excited about a mob boss's nightclub finances. Do you hear yourself? Emma laughed, but it was a slightly wild sound. I know, it's crazy. But Rachel, this is real. This is the kind of work I've been dreaming about. Applying everything I've learned to actual businesses. Seeing real results. Real dangerous results, Rachel countered. Emma, I love you, and I want you to succeed. But this isn't some corporate internship. This is organized crime. People die in that world. Emma sobered, setting down her pen. I know. Believe me, I've thought about nothing else for days. But Marcus promised protection, and honestly, I think he means it. Rachel studied her friend's face. You like him, don't you? Not just the job offer. Him. Emma opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again. She thought about Marcus's intensity, his directness, the way he'd looked at her like she mattered. Maybe, she admitted quietly. Is that completely insane? Probably, Rachel said, but her tone was gentle. Just be careful with your heart as well as your life, okay? The last thing you need is to fall for someone who lives in a completely different world. Emma nodded, but she couldn't quite shake the flutter in her chest when she thought about Marcos Santoro. Hey, before we dive deeper into Emma's decision, I want to ask you something. If you were in Emma's shoes, what would you do? Would you take the risk for the opportunity of a lifetime or play it safe? Drop your answer in the comments below. I genuinely want to know what you think. And if you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Trust me, things are about to get very interesting. 3 days after their meeting at the cafe, Emma called the number on Marcus's card. The same assistant answered, and within moments, she was connected to Marcus. I've made my decision, Emma said, her voice steadier than she felt. I'll do it. I'll work for you. There was a brief pause. Then Marcus's voice came through, warm with approval. I'm very glad to hear that, Emma. When can you start? Emma glanced around her tiny apartment, at the life she was about to leave behind. How about Monday, she said. That gives me time to give notice at the restaurant and prepare. Monday it is, Marcus agreed. I'll send a car for you at 9 a.m. We'll start with the nightclub portfolio, I think. And Emma, he added, his voice dropping, welcome to the family. The phrase sent a shiver down her spine. She wasn't sure if it was excitement or fear, possibly both. Emma's last shift at Bellissimo was bittersweet. She'd given Mr. Romano 2 weeks' notice, citing a new opportunity in accounting. The manager had seemed relieved more than anything, probably worried about having a waitress connected to Marcus Santoro on staff. Rachel hugged her tightly at the end of the night. You call me if anything feels wrong, okay? Promise me. I promise, Emma said, returning the embrace. I'll be fine. You're going to do amazing things, Rachel said, pulling back to look at her friend. Just don't forget about us little people when you're running a criminal empire. Emma laughed, swatting her arm. I'm going to be doing accounting, not running anything. But as she walked out of Bellissimo for the last time, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't possibly predict. Monday morning arrived too quickly. Emma stood in front of her closet, agonizing over what to wear for her first day. She finally settled on a charcoal gray pantsuit and simple blouse, professional but not stuffy. At precisely 9 a.m., a sleek black car pulled up outside her building. The driver, a stern-faced man in his 40s, introduced himself as Vincent and held the door open for her. As they drove through Manhattan, Emma watched the city pass by, her stomach a knot of nerves and anticipation. They pulled up to a modern office building in the financial district. Emma had expected something more, well, criminal-looking. But this was all glass and steel, professional and legitimate. Vincent escorted her to the 20th floor, where a receptionist greeted her by name and directed her to Marcus's office. Emma's heels clicked on the polished marble floor as she approached the large double doors at the end of the hall. She knocked, heart pounding. "Come in," Marcus's voice called. Emma pushed open the door and stepped into a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Marcus stood from behind a massive desk, a smile crossing his face. "Emma, welcome. You look very professional." "Thank you," Emma said, glancing around. "This is not what I expected." Marcus chuckled. "What did you expect? A dark warehouse with flickering lights and guns on the desk." Emma felt herself blush. Maybe something like that. "This is my legitimate front," Marcus explained, gesturing around. "Most of my business operations run through this office. It's all legal, all above board, at least on paper." He moved to a conference table by the windows where several folders were laid out. "These are the files I want you to start with. 3 nightclubs that are underperforming." Emma set down her bag and joined him at the table, her nerves beginning to settle as she fell into familiar territory. She opened the first folder, scanning the numbers. Within minutes she was completely absorbed, her mind already working through the problems and potential solutions. Marcus watched her work, a satisfied expression on his face. For the next several hours, Emma dug into the files, making notes, asking questions, and outlining recommendations. Marcus sat across from her, answering what he could and making calls to get additional information when needed. It felt surprisingly normal, like any other business consultation, except for the occasional reference to people with nicknames like Sonny the Hammer or Fast Eddie. By lunchtime, Emma had identified multiple issues. The clubs were overstaffed, inventory management was a disaster, and the pricing structure was all wrong for the target demographic. She presented her findings to Marcus, who listened intently, occasionally interjecting with questions. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, studying her with those intense gray eyes. "You found all this in one morning," he said. "Imagine what you'll accomplish in a month." Emma felt a flush of pride. These are significant problems, but they're all fixable. With the right changes, you could increase profits by 40 to 50% within a quarter. Marcus smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually serious face. "This is exactly why I hired you. We'll implement your recommendations starting this week." As they broke for lunch, Marcus ordered food to be brought to the office. They ate at the conference table, conversation flowing surprisingly easily. Emma found herself relaxing around him, his intensity softening in the informal setting. He asked about her studies, her background, her goals. She asked about his businesses, carefully avoiding questions about the illegal aspects of his empire. The afternoon brought meetings with managers from the 3 nightclubs Emma had analyzed. Marcus introduced her as his new financial consultant, and while some of the managers looked skeptical, none questioned Marcus's decision. Emma presented her recommendations with confidence, her nervousness fading as she spoke about what she knew best. Over the following weeks, Emma settled into her new role. She arrived at the office each morning, dove into financial reports and business analyses, and worked closely with Marcus to implement changes. The nightclubs began showing improvement almost immediately, profits climbing as inefficiencies were eliminated. Word spread through Marcus's organization about the young woman who was revolutionizing their operations. Not everyone was happy about it. Emma could feel the resentment from some of the old guard, men who had been with Marcus for years and didn't appreciate an outsider, especially a woman, coming in and changing how things worked. But Marcus's support never wavered. When one manager openly questioned Emma's recommendations in a meeting, Marcus shut him down with a cold stare and a quiet warning that carried unmistakable menace. Emma found herself working longer hours, often staying late at the office with Marcus. They would order dinner and continue working, their collaboration becoming increasingly seamless. Emma learned to read Marcus's moods to know when to push and when to hold back. Marcus, in turn, seemed to genuinely value her input, frequently asking her opinion on matters beyond just finances. One evening, about 6 weeks into her new job, Emma was reviewing contracts for a real estate deal when she noticed something odd. The purchase price seemed inflated, and the company selling the property was one she'd seen referenced in other suspicious transactions. She brought it to Marcus immediately, laying out her concerns. Marcus's expression darkened as he reviewed the documents. "Someone's trying to inflate the price and pocket the difference," he said quietly. Emma nodded. "It looks like a kickback scheme. The property is worth maybe $2 million, but they're trying to sell it to you for 3.5. Marcus made a phone call, his voice ice cold as he ordered an investigation into the real estate broker handling the deal. Within 24 hours, the broker had confessed to the scheme and returned the excess money. Marcus called Emma into his office, where he handed her a bonus check that made her eyes widen. "You saved me $1.5 million, he said. "This is 5% of that, which I think is fair." Emma stared at the check for $75,000, her hands trembling. This is too much," she stammered. Marcus shook his head. "You earned it. Your attention to detail and instincts are exactly what I need." Emma tried to process the amount. It was more than she'd made in an entire year at the restaurant. As she looked up at Marcus, she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. It wasn't just professional appreciation. There was something warmer, more personal. The dynamic between them had been shifting gradually, almost imperceptibly. The late nights working together, the shared meals, the easy conversations that had nothing to do with business. Emma had tried to ignore it, to maintain professional boundaries, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. Marcus, too, seemed to be struggling with the same thing. One Friday evening, after a particularly successful week where 2 more businesses had shown significant improvement, Marcus suggested they celebrate. "Not here in the office," he said. "Let me take you to dinner." A real dinner, not takeout at the conference table. Emma hesitated, knowing this would cross a line, but she found herself nodding. "I'd like that." Marcus took her to a small, intimate restaurant in Brooklyn, far from the usual haunts of his associates. It was quiet, romantic even, with candlelit tables and soft music. Over wine and excellent Italian food, their conversation drifted away from business. Marcus told her about growing up in New York, about family traditions and old memories, carefully editing out the criminal elements but giving her glimpses of the man behind the reputation. Emma shared her own story, about her father who had died when she was young, her mother who worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, her determination to create a better life through education. Marcus listened intently, his eyes never leaving her face. "You've worked hard for everything you have," he said. "That's something I deeply respect." As the evening wore on, Emma felt the walls she'd carefully constructed crumbling. This was dangerous territory falling for her boss, especially when that boss was a crime lord. But Marcus was different than she'd expected. Yes, he was dangerous and powerful, but he was also intelligent, surprisingly kind, and undeniably compelling. When he drove her home that night, walking her to her door like a proper gentleman, Emma found herself not wanting the evening to end. Marcus seemed to sense her reluctance. "Emma," he said softly, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, "I should tell you something. When I first asked you for financial advice that night at the restaurant, I was testing my men as much as I was joking around. But your answer, your courage to speak honestly, it caught me completely off guard." Emma's heart raced. "I was terrified," she admitted. "You didn't show it," Marcus said, a slight smile on his lips. "And every day since you've continued to impress me, not just with your skills, but with who you are." He reached up, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "This is probably inappropriate, given that I'm your employer." "Probably," Emma breathed, but she didn't step away. Marcus leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull back. When his lips met hers, Emma felt like the world tilted. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, then deepened as she responded, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing harder. "This complicates things," Emma whispered. Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "I know, but I've never been good at doing what's simple or safe." Emma laughed softly, clearly. She pulled back slightly to look at him. "We should probably talk about this, set some ground rules or something." "Monday," Marcus agreed. "We'll figure it out Monday. But tonight let me just be a man who took a beautiful woman to dinner and kissed her goodnight." Emma smiled, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. "Good night, Marcus." "Good night, Emma," he said, stepping back reluctantly. She watched him walk back to his car, her fingers touching her lips where his had been. The weekend passed in a blur of confused emotions. Emma alternated between giddy excitement and practical concern. Rachel came over on Saturday demanding details, and Emma found herself confiding everything. Her friend's reaction was predictably mixed. On one hand, she was happy to see Emma so obviously smitten. On the other hand, she was terrified for her friend's safety and emotional well-being. Monday morning arrived with Emma feeling nervous in an entirely new way. When she entered Marcus's office, he was on the phone but gestured for her to sit. She watched him work, noting the subtle signs of stress in his posture. When he hung up, he rubbed his temples, looking suddenly exhausted. "Everything okay?" Emma asked. Marcus sighed. "There's a situation developing. Nothing for you to worry about, but it's going to require my attention for the next few days." He looked at her, his expression softening. "About Friday night." Emma's heart clenched. "Are you regretting it?" she asked quietly. "Not for a second," Marcus said firmly. "But I need you to understand something, Emma. My life, my world, it's complicated and dangerous. Getting involved with me personally puts you at risk in ways beyond just working for me." Emma had known this was coming. "I understand," she said. "Do you?" Marcus asked, his eyes intense. Because there are people who would hurt you just to get to me. There are rivals, law enforcement, internal threats. He stood and moved to the window, his back to her. I care about you too much to let you walk into this blindly. Emma stood and moved to stand beside him. Marcus, I'm not blind. I've known the risk since I took this job. She took a breath. And I'm choosing to take them anyway. Because what I feel for you, it's worth the risk. Marcus turned to face her, searching her eyes. You're sure? He asked. Emma nodded. I'm sure. Marcus pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. Then we'll figure this out together, he said into her hair. But I need you to promise me something. If things ever get too dangerous, if I tell you to run, you run. You don't ask questions. You don't hesitate. Promise me. Emma pulled back to look at him. I promise, she said, though the thought of leaving him made her chest ache. The next few months were a whirlwind. Emma and Marcus balanced their professional and personal relationships with surprising success. At work, they maintained appropriate boundaries, though everyone in the organization quickly picked up on the shift in their dynamic. Outside the office, they spent nearly every evening together. Dinner, long walks through the city, quiet nights at Marcus's penthouse. Emma met more of Marcus's associates, learning to navigate the complex hierarchy of his organization. Some accepted her with respect, recognizing her value to Marcus and the business. Others remained suspicious or resentful. Emma learned to read the room, to know who could be trusted and who required careful handling. Her work continued to yield impressive results. She'd moved beyond the nightclubs to analyze Marcus's entire portfolio. Real estate holdings were restructured for maximum tax efficiency. Restaurants were refinanced to improve cash flow. Construction companies had their accounting systems overhauled. Everywhere Emma looked, she found ways to increase profits and reduce risk. Marcus's respect for her grew in tandem with his feelings. He consulted her on major decisions, valued her opinion on matters of strategy and planning. Emma found herself becoming not just his financial consultant and girlfriend, but a trusted advisor. It was heady and exciting, but also increasingly concerning. She was getting deeper into his world with each passing day. The turning point came on a Tuesday afternoon in late spring. Emma was in Marcus's office reviewing quarterly reports when Vincent burst in without knocking. His face was pale, expression urgent. "Boss, we have a problem," he said, barely glancing at Emma. "It's about the Westfield audit." Emma's blood ran cold. The Westfield deal was the one that had started everything. The investigation she'd prompted that night at the restaurant. "What about it?" Marcus asked, his voice deadly calm. Vincent hesitated, looking at Emma. Marcus waved a hand impatiently. "She's cleared for everything. Speak." "Tony, before we dealt with him, he talked to the Costello family," Vincent said. "Told them about her, about how she found the leak. Marco Costello is asking questions, wanting to know if there are problems with the joint ventures." Marcus's expression turned to stone. Emma felt fear creep up her spine. She knew enough now to understand what this meant. The Costellos were rivals, and if they thought Marcus's operations were compromised or that he was weak, they might make a move. "Increase security on Emma immediately," Marcus ordered. "Double shifts, eyes on her apartment, escorts everywhere." "Vincent, I want to know every move Costello makes." Vincent nodded and left quickly. Emma stood frozen, the reality of her situation crashing down on her. This was no longer abstract danger. People were talking about her, potentially targeting her. Marcus came to her immediately, taking her hands. "Emma, look at me," he said firmly. She met his eyes, seeing the worry there beneath the cold control. "You're going to be fine. I won't let anything happen to you." Emma nodded, trying to believe him. "What do we do?" she asked. "For now, business as usual," Marcus said. "But you don't go anywhere alone. Vincent or another guard will be with you at all times. And," he hesitated, "it might be smart for you to stay at my place for a while. Better security." Emma agreed without hesitation. The thought of being alone in her apartment now terrified her. That evening, Emma packed a bag and moved into Marcus's penthouse. The space was enormous, luxurious, with panoramic views of the city, but Emma barely noticed the opulence. Her mind was occupied with calculating risks and outcomes, her analytical brain trying to solve a problem that couldn't be solved with spreadsheets. Marcus was on the phone constantly over the next few days, managing the situation with the Costellos. Emma tried to work to maintain some sense of normalcy, but it was difficult with armed guards stationed outside the penthouse and following her everywhere. She felt like a prisoner, albeit in a gilded cage. On the fourth night, Marcos came home looking exhausted. Emma had made dinner, needing something to occupy her hands and mind. They ate in silence for a while before Marcus spoke. "I'm meeting with Costello tomorrow," he said, "to address his concerns and make it clear that any move against you is a move against me." Emma set down her fork, appetite gone. "Is that safe? For you, I mean." Marcus reached across the table to take her hand. "I've been dealing with men like Costello my entire life. I know how to handle this. But I need you to stay here tomorrow with Vincent and the others. Don't leave for any reason." Emma agreed, though she hated feeling helpless. That night, she lay in Marcus's arms, unable to sleep. "What if this is just the beginning?" she whispered. "What if there's always going to be something, someone threatening us?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "That's the reality of my world," he said finally. "I warned you it would be dangerous." "I know," Emma said, "and I meant it when I said I could handle it. But Marcus," she propped herself up to look at him in the darkness, "maybe it's time to accelerate your plans, to transition more of your business to legitimate operations. Reduce the targets on your back." Marcus studied her face. "You're talking about years of work," he said. "So we start now," Emma replied. "I've been analyzing everything, Marcus. You have enough legitimate assets that, with the right strategy, you could phase out the criminal operations gradually. It would take time, maybe 5 years, but you could do it." Marcus considered this, his mind clearly working through the implications. "You'd help me?" he asked. "Every step of the way," Emma promised. The next day was the longest of Emma's life. She tried to work, but couldn't concentrate. Vincent and 2 other guards were stationed in the penthouse, professional and alert. Emma paced, checked her phone obsessively, and tried not to imagine all the ways the meeting with Costello could go wrong. When Marcus finally walked through the door at 6 p.m., Emma ran to him. He caught her, holding her tight. "It's handled," he said. "Costello has been convinced that you're an asset, not a liability, and that any action against you would trigger a war he can't afford." Emma pulled back to look at him. "Just like that?" she asked skeptically. "Well, there may have been some negotiation involved," Marcus said with a slight smile, "and I agreed to bring him in on a construction deal that will make him a lot of money. But, yes, it's handled." Emma felt the tension drain from her body, leaving her shaky with relief. Over the next few weeks, life gradually returned to normal, or as normal as it could be in their circumstances. Emma moved permanently into Marcus's penthouse, her tiny apartment abandoned. She threw herself into work with renewed focus, beginning the long-term project of legitimizing Marcus's empire. It was complex, delicate work, requiring careful planning and execution, but Emma was in her element, creating structures and strategies that would transform criminal enterprises into legal businesses. Marcus watched her work with pride and admiration. She'd not only survived her first real brush with danger in his world, but she'd emerged stronger and more determined. Their relationship deepened, the shared experience of the threat from Costello, forging a bond that went beyond romance or professional partnership. Months passed. Emma completed her degree, graduating with top honors. Marcus attended the ceremony, sitting in the back but beaming with pride. Her work for him continued to yield results. Profits from legitimate operations increased by 60%. Several criminal ventures were successfully transitioned or shut down. Marcus's legal exposure decreased significantly. On the anniversary of the night they'd met at Bellissimo, Marcus planned something special. He took Emma to the restaurant where it had all begun. The same corner booth was reserved for them. Over wine and familiar dishes, they reminisced about that fateful evening. "Can you believe it's been a year?" Emma asked, sipping her wine. "Best mistake I ever made," Marcus said, referring to his joking question that had started everything, asking for financial advice from a waitress. Emma laughed. "Best risk I ever took," answering honestly. She looked around the restaurant. "This place looks different now. Or maybe I'm different." "You're different," Marcus agreed. "Stronger, more confident." "You've become an integral part of my organization, Emma. People respect you, fear you even. Some of them forget you're not actually part of the family." Emma met his eyes. "Am I not?" she asked quietly. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about," he said, opening the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring. Emma gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Marcus stood and moved to kneel beside the booth, a gesture that made several nearby diners stop and stare. "Emma Carson," Marcus said, his voice steady and sure. "You walked into my life a year ago and changed everything. You made me want to be better, to build something legitimate and lasting. You've been my partner, my advisor, my love." He took her hand. "Will you be my wife?" Emma felt tears streaming down her face. She nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, absolutely yes." Marcus slid the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her as the restaurant erupted in applause. As they sat back down, both grinning like fools, Emma looked at the ring on her finger, then at Marcus. "You know my mother is going to have questions about what you do for a living," she said. Marcus laughed. "I'll tell her I'm in business management and real estate. It's not technically a lie anymore, thanks to you." Emma smiled, but then turned serious. "Marcus, I need you to promise me something." He raised an eyebrow. "Anything." "Promise me we'll keep working toward getting out completely," Emma said. "I want a life with you that doesn't involve looking over our shoulders. I want us to be truly legitimate." Marcus took both her hands. "I promise," he said solemnly. 5 years, maybe less if we push hard. We'll build something legal and clean, something we can be proud of, something we can pass on to our children someday." The mention of children made Emma's heart skip. "That's the future I want," she said, "with you." The rest of the evening was a celebration. Marcus called his closest associates to share the news. Emma called Rachel, who screamed so loudly Emma had to hold the phone away from her ear. By the time they left the restaurant, Emma felt like she was floating. Her life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined a year ago. The wedding was planned for 6 months later, giving them time to handle the myriad details and continue their work on legitimizing Marcus's operations. Emma threw herself into both projects with equal enthusiasm. The wedding would be a blend of Marcus's traditional Italian customs and Emma's simpler preferences, small but elegant, intimate but meaningful. As the months passed, Emma's role in the organization solidified. She wasn't just Marcus's fiancée or his financial consultant anymore. She was a key figure in the transition to legitimacy, respected by most and feared by those who opposed change. She learned to navigate the political landscape of organized crime, to negotiate and compromise when necessary, to stand firm when required. The wedding day arrived on a beautiful autumn afternoon. Emma stood in front of a mirror, adjusting her simple but elegant white dress. Rachel stood beside her, tears in her eyes. "You look stunning," her friend said. "Are you ready for this?" Emma looked at her reflection, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The risk she'd taken that night at the restaurant, the choices she'd made since, the life she'd built with Marcus. "I'm ready," she said with certainty. The ceremony was held in a small, historic church, attended by a carefully curated guest list that included family, close friends, and Marcus's most trusted associates. As Emma walked down the aisle on her mother's arm, her eyes found Marcus waiting at the altar. He looked devastating in his tuxedo, his eyes locked on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. When they exchanged vows, Emma felt the weight and meaning of every word. She was promising herself to this complicated, dangerous, but ultimately good man. When Marcus slid the wedding band onto her finger, his hands were surprisingly gentle. "I love you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you too," Emma whispered back. The reception was a joyful affair, filled with dancing, laughter, and celebration.